Chapter 20, Agendas.
It was about 12:30 on Wednesday afternoon, right in the middle of Mr. Z's preparation period. He was writing short equations on the board, one for every student in his next class. Mrs. Davenport appeared in the doorway of room 27 and said, "If you have a minute, I'd like you to explain something for me." Mr. Z knew that voice. He turned around and saw the principal waving a sheet of blue paper. "Sure. What's that?" he asked. She took a few steps into the room. "It's the agenda for tomorrow night's school committee meeting. And there's an item under new business. Students and faculty advisor to propose new comic book club at Ashworth Intermediate School." "Oh," said Mr. Z. "That. I hadn't heard anything yet. I was hoping that the school committee wouldn't even consider the request. But it looks like they did." The math teacher felt his hands begin to sweat. Mrs. Davenport said, "Let me guess. The students are Greg Kenton and Mara Shaw, and the faculty advisor is you, right?" Mr. Z nodded. "And I had planned to talk to you just as soon as I found out if the committee was going to accept a presentation, because I didn't want to cause a stir, not if it wasn't necessary." Mrs. Davenport smiled at his choice of words. She waved the blue sheet again and said, "And now it's necessary, so talk to me." "Well," said Mr. Z, "you know these two kids, both of them so smart, and they figured out that it's the school committee who sets the policy about selling things in the schools. It was right there in your announcement. And they think that their little comics are as good as some of the books the kids can buy here at school from the book clubs every month. So they want to make their case. And I sort of told them I'd help. That's all." Mrs. Davenport was still smiling faintly. "You offered to help, even though you knew my opinion about all this?" Mr. Z said, "I didn't exactly volunteer, but when they told me what they wanted to do, I guess I decided to stay involved, to try to represent the best interests of the school." Mrs. Davenport's eyebrows went up. "Represent the best interests of the school. You didn't think I was already doing that?" Mr. Z said, "Well, not exactly." The principal's eyebrows went up a notch higher. Mr. Z had been dreading this moment, but he knew what he had to say. He gulped and went on. "I don't think there's anything wrong with comic books. With the good ones, that is. And the ones these kids are making aren't bad. They're definitely creative. And maybe other kids should get a chance to read them." Mrs. Davenport nodded. "Ah, I didn't know that you'd become a reading expert." There was a long, awkward pause. Mr. Z practically held his breath, afraid to guess what was coming. When it came, he was completely surprised, because Mrs. Davenport slowly shook her head from side to side, and then she began to chuckle. "A reading expert." And then she smiled broadly. Mr. Z began to breathe again. She said, "Well, Mr. Xenotopoulos, I thank you for your pioneering work as a reading specialist, and also for keeping watch over our young tycoons. And I'll be there tomorrow night to hear the presentation. And who knows, I might just have an agenda of my own to represent the best interests of the school." And with that, she turned and left, chuckling all the way back to her office.